So I'm pretty big on climate change. The part where we make it not happen because it would essentially end human civilization as we know it specifically is the part I am big on. And so are a lot of other people, it turns out. However, in this group of people, a certain phenomenon is common. And that phenomenon I would describe as a intellectual disconnect, which I would in turn describe as fucking fatal. And that's what we're gonna talk about today. Fact! Nuclear power is good for the environment. As a matter of fact, in like the short to medium to even you could say long term, nuclear power is way better for the environment than almost any of the other green energy sources that we use, except for maybe solar. Here's what happens when you put wind turbines places. If you put them on land, small birds are fine. It's just a bit loud, but so are roads. Big birds of prey? Not so much. Those kill them. Put them out on the sea, those beautiful offshore wind parks generate a lot of power. A lot of marine life just goes crazy from the vibrations going through the water. Here's what happens when you tap water for energy. Dams just straight up destroy limnic ecosystems. Just kaboof, annihilate them. And if you have the kind of river power plant that doesn't use a dam, still, in all likelihood, at least you're gonna massively disturb those ecosystems. Tidal power, you massively disturb the ecosystems that are on the sea floor, and it can do supreme damage to crustaceans. And while geothermal doesn't really disturb any ecosystems that we know of, there's always the small but ever-present risk of it causing a massive fucking earthquake. And I can already see all the fucking smug fossil fuel advocates grinning about how all of these green energy things, they're not so perfectly green after all, and maybe we shouldn't be using them because they're bad for the environment. And you know what? Those people are still idiots. Here's something that you are going to have to wrap your head around. If you want human civilization to continue, there will be an environmental cost. There is, at our current technological level, no perfectly green energy source that has no negative impact on the environment whatsoever. No such thing exists. And while personally I put a lot of faith in fusion power, climate change is gonna get a lot worse before we can even dream about putting the first commercial fusion reactor on the grid. So how about we don't rely on that happening? Literally the only way to have power generation no longer have any impact on the environment whatsoever is if humans stop using electricity and then commit mass suicide, which is not going to happen. No matter what you do, it will have an impact. And you need to be ready to acknowledge this, because some things have a way smaller impact than others. Because this is one of the primary arguments that idiots will use to convince people that renewables and other innovative green technology that is way better for the environment than coal and its cousins are not good. After all, they will just hold them to a different standard. Oh, what about all the mining that happens to make the photovoltaic cells and the batteries for electric cars? Yes, the environmental impact of manufacturing a single electric car is way bigger than the environmental impact of manufacturing a single petrol car. That doesn't matter, because ultimately, over its lifetime, the electric car will be much better for the environment than the petrol car. But it will still have an environmental impact. That impact will ultimately be lower, but it will also look different than the impact that the petrol car would have had. And it may seem as though that's just trading one problem for another. And that's because that's exactly what that is. This is the biggest component of risk management, is that you trade big, urgent problems for small, not so urgent problems. Which leads us to nuclear power and green energy. The most important environmental problem that this planet faces at this time is greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The primary contributor to that problem is the fact that we use fossil fuels to generate energy. There's a lot of alternatives that don't have greenhouse gas emissions, but which do disturb ecosystems to some extent, and they're also fairly unreliable. If only there was a method of generating ubiquitous amounts of power that didn't produce any greenhouse gases whatsoever that we could add to that already quite varied and useful toolbox. Oh wait! There is! And it's called nuclear fission! Here's a fact. If you're a pilot who flies planes through the air, you will, over the course of your career, be exposed to significantly more radiation than anyone working at a nuclear power plant. Hell, if you have to take like a long flight every week because you're like rich or some important businessman, the same is true about you. If you live near a nuclear power plant, you don't have to worry about radiation, because outside of the immediate reactor chamber, it's basically benign. And by basically benign, I mean it's not any more than just the background radiation you have anywhere that you live at any time. Radioactive waste, however, is a problem, and let's not pretend that it isn't a big problem. But the main problem isn't so much with storing it right now as it is with storing it in a way that people in 30 million years will know not to touch it. Now, I don't want to sound heartless, but with the whole impending massive cataclysmic climate catastrophe within the century thing going on, I don't really give a shit about people in 30 million years. There's a much more urgent problem, it is right on our doorstep, and it is moving in. You see, whenever the most minor thing goes wrong with nuclear power, the news just hones in on it with a laser focus. This makes it easy to forget that while something may occasionally go wrong in a nuclear power plant, coal power plants are just spewing death into the atmosphere happily every single hour of every single day. And while we're at it, let's actually talk about things going wrong at nuclear power plants. There's only ever been one truly catastrophic event with a nuclear power plant, and that was Chernobyl. And no, Fukushima doesn't count, because even though it was put on the same INES level as Chernobyl, the impact of Fukushima isn't even near what Chernobyl was. That was a political move because people want to be scared of nuclear power. All of those spooky, scary, false color pictures that you saw of the radiation creeping into the ocean and just destroying the entire Pacific ecosystem, absurdly exaggerated. Outside of that immediate bay where the nuclear power plant was, it's barely even detectable. And inside of that specific bay where the nuclear power plant was, and still is, by the way, it's only so dangerous that maybe you shouldn't go take a bath there every weekend. This is very different to Chernobyl, where there was actually a massive impact on the immediate surroundings of the power plant. And here's the thing about both of these nuclear disasters: they didn't happen because nuclear bad, they happened because humans stupid and do mismanagement. In Chernobyl, they used graphite instead of water as a regulator, which is a bad idea. And everybody knew this at the time. It's just that building one of those was cheaper and the Soviet Union didn't really give a shit. In Fukushima, they were told, hey, make the tsunami wall higher because this is a new risk factor that we have to contend with. It's not big enough. And then they didn't. And it turns out that with these two absolute worst nuclear power accidents that have happened ever, the absolute worst case scenario of what could have gone wrong didn't even closely happen. Because it turns out that nuclear power plants, even the horribly mismanaged ones, have a lot of redundant safety. Oh no, the reactor core is melting through the concrete and will be trapped in there forever. Yes, that's what it's supposed to do. That's why the concrete is there, so it doesn't get flushed into the fucking ocean. And you know what? It didn't. In Chernobyl, the other reactors, the ones that didn't blow up, which were basically right next to the one that did blow up, were in operation until 2003. because they didn't really give a shit about the other one blowing up. That's how sturdy these things are. And even though, verifiably, measurably, Chernobyl did have a worldwide impact, albeit comparatively a small one that was greatly exaggerated by the media and just the people who didn't really know how fucking radiation works, everything in the radius of at least 30 kilometers around the plant was fucked big time. But that once again wasn't primarily because of the radiation, but because of the poor management of the situation. The thing about radiation is that it's dangerous and scary. It's this mysterious, undetectable force that can just act on you and give you cancer in 30 years. Of course it's fucking scary. But nuclear power accidents are like plane crashes. They happen way more rarely than car crashes, but when they do happen, they have a way bigger impact, and so everybody's gonna talk about it. And even though the plane is still the safest method of transportation, way more people are afraid of flying in a plane than they are of driving in a car. We know this because we have statistics. Problem is that for the vast majority of people, their primary decision-making and opinion-forming algorithm is not so much based on fact as it is heavily skewed toward emotion. Emotion is not how we're gonna save the planet. Cold, hard logic, science, and good engineering is the only way we can save the planet. If doctors made diagnoses based on emotion instead of, medical fact, fatality rates in hospitals would be much higher. And yes, hospitals are scary, but they're also where you go because they can heal you of shit. Many more people die at home than they do in hospitals, yet probably you associate the hospital more with death than the average person's home. That's because death, like radiation, is super scary and we need to contextualize it somehow. But here's a fact. If we want to fight climate change, we're gonna need a lot of power. Electric cars alone, if we finally want to get off petrol, will put massive strain on the grid. But if the power we put into those electric cars just comes from coal and other non-renewable, atmosphere poisoning sources, we might as well not make the switch, because Earth is dying either way. So how about, in addition to using wind and water and solar and geothermal and all of those beautiful things, we also use the one with the least environmental impact that can generate the most power in the most reliable way? Because here's another little factoid to put this whole thing in perspective for you. Wind turbines, when they're working, disrupt their environment. Nuclear power only disrupts its environment when it stops working. Think with your head. Crisis is imminent. This is no time to be driven by your emotions. Nuclear power is good for the environment. It's not perfect. In fact, it's far from it. There's a lot of things wrong with it. But right now, it's the best solution we have. Thank you very much for watching this video and probably already typing your angry screed in the comment section. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, or buying some of the merchandise that I have, or possibly my book. And in that spirit, use solar and wind and water and all of the others, but also use nuclear in your garage. And see you around, cunts!